Hello, Swift scholars! I hope you are ready to become debug detectives. We are going to deliberately introduce a bug into our project to cause a crash in our code, but along the way, we'll be able to arm you so that you can recover from the inevitable bugs that you encounter with insight and aplomb. We'll create a common error, but one that's tough to diagnose if you don't know what to look for. We'll learn how to find more information if your simulator crashes and returns you to AppDelegate.swift. You'll learn about broken IB outlet and IB action connections and how to fix them. You'll learn how to use the Find Inspector to hunt down errors for non-key value compliant key errors. We'll look at the Connections Inspector and the Connections dialog box, and we'll also show an unresolved identifier error and discuss why these occur and where to look to fix these problems as well. Hopefully you'll remember these techniques if you encounter these problems. If not, for quick reference, you can return to this video and review the bullet points at the end. After working with hundreds of students, I've seen firsthand how easy it is to make these errors and how frustrating it can be for the new programmer if you're not in the know. Let's arm you with knowledge, coder. Giddy up. Remember, in our earlier video, we gave you a major warning saying do not, never, never, never rename IB outlets by typing to replace the outlet name, and the same goes for IB actions. Now, this is a super easy mistake for developers to do because oftentimes you're typing into the connection box, you might make a spelling error and you think, oh, I spelled second wrong. I didn't mean to spell it that way. I'll just go ahead and type over my mistake right here in my code. No! This will create what's called a broken connection, and it will result in a spectacular and most unfriendly crash. And right now, we're actually going to create that gnarly error because it's very common and you're likely to encounter this early and often in your career. When this occurs, Xcode won't provide you a lot of help, so unfortunately, one of the most common errors is also one of the most unfriendly to the new programmer. We'll learn how to deal with it, and along the way, we'll also learn some detective techniques for sleuthing out and squashing bugs. Now, although I'm a terrible speller and often create spelling errors, message label is spelled properly, so let's work together and show what would produce the same error. That spectacular crash I spoke of will also occur if I rename the IB outlet the bad way by just typing over it with a new name. Now, it's easy to take a look at this file and say, okay, message label is mentioned 3 times, so if we make those 3 changes, we should be okay. But with Xcode, there's more than meets the eye. And we can see this by first trying to do things the right way. The right way to change the name from message label to awesome label, to change the name of this IB outlet, is to highlight message label, right-click, select refactor, and rename. Now look at how many times message label is mentioned. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wait, what's this extra guy down here that says main storyboard outlet? Well, Xcode keeps track of a connection between the file and the outlet. It's invisible in that it's not in this code file, but it is there behind the scenes. Now, if I start to make the change by typing awesome label, look, all 4 of these are changing at the same time. But don't press return. We don't want to accept these changes. We're going to press escape to undo the changes we were about to make. I want us to purposely break things so we know what to look for if we encounter these errors in the wild and how to fix them. So to break things, on my first line where our IB outlet was created by Xcode, I'm going to type over message label with awesome label. And oh, Xcode is showing me error messages in these other 2 spots where message label was mentioned. How come? Well, the red error marks also say unresolved identifier. This essentially says my code is trying to refer to something that hasn't been created yet. Now, we'll cover these concepts a little bit more, but here's your first introduction. Up here where we create IB outlet, we declare this as a variable named, well, now it's named awesome label. This keyword var here is like saying I'm going to create a variable, and you can think of variable as being a box that holds data. Awesome label has now been declared. It is now in existence, so we can now work with it. It is a variable or a box that can hold data representing a label on my user interface. See how it says UI label here? User interface label. Now down here, when we say message label twice, we haven't created a box. There is no var statement for anything called message label. So it says unresolved identifier. Xcode is just saying, I don't know what this message label thing is. I haven't seen that important keyword var in front of anything named message label. This was never created, never declared. I can't work with what you've given me. Now you might think, okay, no big deal. I meant for those 2 guys to be changed to awesome label too, so I'll just make the change now. but we changed the 3 message label occurrences we could see. But remember, also connected behind the scenes is that connection to the IB outlet that we saw too. That 4th occurrence of message label that would change if we did things the proper way, but we didn't do things the proper way. That still exists as a connection to message label, a value that no longer exists, and that will crash our code. When we build and run, I'll speed things up a little bit here, but oh, look at this spectacular crash. This looks so gnarly. I'm thrown out of the simulator, I'm back in Xcode, I see this red line here telling me that there's an error in my code. This is called a runtime error. It occurred while my code was running. It isn't the kind of error that Xcode can find and flag before I build and run. Now this is especially confusing for the new developer because it shows me code that I didn't even touch. If we look up here, we can see I'm in a file called AppDelegate.swift. Hey, I never went into that file. I only worked in ViewController.swift and main.storyboard. Also, I'm no longer in the project navigator. See up here up top in the navigator pane? The icon that's highlighted in blue, the one that's selected, is this one that looks like 3 columns of lines. Hover your cursor over and the tooltip says this is the debug navigator. Most of this is meaningless to us at this point, but let's put on our deerstalker hat and Sherlock out this problem. This red highlighted line indicates where, in our project, the execution of our code stopped. If we click on this icon with the 3 little lines at the start of this error message, I can see in the expanded error message it says thread 1, a lot of gibberish, but then this class is not key value coding compliant for the key message label. Message label? Hey, that's our clue. We thought we got rid of all references to message label. Now, I'm going to highlight the name message label here. I'm going to copy with a Command-C, but let me show you one more useful place to look for clues if you have a runtime crash. Now, down here in Xcode is the debug area. Now, in case yours looks different, you can drag the window up to give yourself a little bit more room, and in the lower right-hand corner, you've got show hide icons that will show or hide the variable area to the left and the console area to the right. We want to look at the console area. Now, most of this is utterly incomprehensible, but don't be intimidated. We can scroll to the top past all of these numbers until we hit just past the number 0 here, and we see the message with 3 stars that say first throw call stack, and just above that, we see the same error message that was in this message that showed up in one of the lines in our code up top. Not key value coding compliant for message label. Now, even if we don't yet know what key value coding compliant is, we do know we shouldn't have any reference to message label. Now, since I copied message label, I'm going to paste this into Xcode's find navigator to locate any place where message label is still mentioned in my project. We need to get rid of all those. So the find navigator is up here. It's this very Sherlock-looking magnifying glass. I'll click this. I'll paste the term that I'm looking for into this search field, message label, and I can see after pressing return that there is one instance of message label still in my project. Now I can click that reference, Xcode brings up main.storyboard, and over here in the inspectors area on the right, it also shows me an area called the connections inspector. See how I hover my cursor over this little circle with an arrow in it, and it says connection inspector. Now let's look in the Connections Inspector. We see one line with a little yield sign next to it. Apple actually shouldn't use a yield sign here. Most other places in Xcode where there's a yield sign, that means warning, but your code will still work. Apple should put a stop sign in here in red because when these kinds of errors occur, they will completely crash your code with a runtime error. Now this yield sign is in this area that's labeled outlet, meaning that we have a broken connection to an IB outlet. And it's in this line that says message label. Also note that if you hover your cursor over this line, you get a message that says view controller does not have an outlet named message label. Aha! Just as we thought, that's the problem. Now we don't want this. We need to get rid of it. And we can do that by clicking on this little X right here that deletes the broken connection. The yield sign is gone. Our code won't crash. But now, even though we got rid of the crash causing broken connection, we still don't have a connection between the IB outlet called awesome label and this object on our main storyboard. So we need to recreate that connection. I'm going to click in the upper right-hand corner to hide the navigator pane and the debug pane, just to give me more work area in Xcode. Let's get back into the assistant editor mode, where our 2 files are side by side. Now to do that, we'll get into the project navigator, so we want to click on the icon in the upper left-hand corner of Xcode that looks like a little file folder. Now we're in the project navigator. In the project navigator, I'm going to click on ViewController.swift, then hold down my Option key, and while doing that, I'll click on Main Storyboard. Now we've got these files side by side side, that's called the assistant editor, and I can see the little circle next to IB outlet is empty, meaning there's no connection. If I move my cursor over that circle, nothing is highlighted in my main storyboard on the right. Now, sometimes Xcode gets a little fluky and it won't allow you to do this, but here's a quick tip to reestablish a connection that you can try, and hopefully it'll work for you. If you move your cursor inside of the little circle that's not filled in, we can click in there. You don't even have to control click. Start to drag while holding down your mouse. The rubber band will form, and when you move it over the object that you want to connect it to, you'll see it gets highlighted. Mine's highlighted in blue here. You can see the word label shows up that says, hey, I'm connecting this to a label, and when I let go, I can see that circle is now filled in. If I move my cursor on top of that circle, I can see the UI label it's attached to is highlighted on the right. I can even see that there's a little callout that says awesome, old connection deleted, new connection created. Now let's build and run. I'm going to click first on the stop button and then on the play button. My simulator pops up. No crash this time. I see the console prints view did load has run. Let's click on show message a few times. Boom, 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 boom. The message button was pressed. Perfect. Now I'm going to get back in Xcode, stop the execution in the simulator. I'm going to show you just another way that you can recreate this connection in case that drag from the empty circle didn't work. Let me click in the upper right hand corner to get rid of the debug pane just to give myself some more room. Then I'm going to highlight this whole IB outlet line for awesome label, and I'm going to delete it. Now you might be thinking, hey, you just deleted that. You don't have a valid connection. That's exactly right. Here's another way we can find broken connections. You see over here in the main storyboard, this little area with a yellow circle is called the dock. If I hold my cursor over the top of it, it says View Controller. If I right click on it, it will bring up something that looks a lot like the Connections Inspector. A dialog box that shows the connections. We see a yield sign just as we saw before. Hover your cursor over the X, you see the same error we had before. View Controller does not have an outlet named Awesome Label. Click that X to get rid of it. Click in the left corner to get rid of this connections dialog. Now we can simply click on the label that we want to connect, hold down the control key while we drag over into our View Controller file. Let the rubber band go just underneath this class definition line. The connection box pops up. Let's call it Awesome Label. Click Connect. These two errors we had down below briefly go away. Build and run. Click, click, click. No errors. Looking great. Let's not forget to do things the right way and change Awesome Label back to Message Label. So I'm going to double click on Awesome Label to highlight it. Right click. Select Refactor, Rename, change Awesome Label to Message Label. It changes in 4 places. Press Return. Perfect. We're now ready to resume the next video right where we left off, but now you have the power of a debug detective. And in case you run into these problems in the future, you can just take a look at this step-by-step list on how to deal with issues if you're kicked out of the simulator and return to AppDelegate.swift. This often means that you've got a broken connection for an item that no longer exists in your code. So check for a not key value coding compliant error highlighted in your code. This error can also be found in the console just above the numbers and first throw and call stack. Copy the name of the value that's cited as not key value coding compliant. Paste it into the Find Navigator and press Return. You'll see a bunch of results. Double-click the results to see everywhere in your code where the non-compliant value shows up. And in the Connection Inspector, click the X next to any yield signs. Then recreate any missing IB outlets by control-dragging from the main storyboard to your code. You are now armed to squash those bugs. Keep at it, Swifter.